You may not realize this, but a study involving 436 individuals who had been in relationships with partners displaying narcissistic traits found that most of these relationships do not end with a clear breakup, but with a prolonged, silent withdrawal, one that leaves the person who stays behind confused and questioning their own reality. Narcissists rarely leave in chaos. Instead, they slowly reduce their presence, withdraw emotionally, and quietly prepare their exit, all while you still believe you are trying to fix what's broken. At first, you only sense that something is off. They are less present, less warm, yet still close enough to keep your hope alive. Then, while you are still fighting to repair the connection, they have already secured their way out. And when they finally turn their back, you don't just lose the relationship, you are the only one left standing in the wreckage, asking yourself where you went wrong. What makes this experience especially cruel is this: you don't just lose a relationship, you lose trust in your own perception. You replay every sign, every conversation, every moment you dismissed because you told yourself, maybe I'm being too sensitive. Meanwhile, for the narcissist, the departure was never impulsive. It was a calculated sequence, designed to ensure that when they walked away, control remained in their hands, while you were left behind, carrying guilt, confusion, and unanswered questions, unsure of what really happened or why everything ended without closure. That's why this video is not about surface-level pain. We are going to go deeper into the psychological mechanics of a deliberate withdrawal. Why you didn't see it until it was too late. Why they were able to leave with such emotional detachment. And most importantly, how their silence can stop controlling you and instead become the moment you begin reclaiming yourself. And if you feel like you were abandoned in fog, no clear breakup, only a slow disappearance, then you are touching the most ruthless technique of a narcissistic partner. They don't end things, they make you lose your way. A clean breakup can still hurt, but it gives you a marker, a place where the pain begins, and eventually, a place where you move forward. Silent withdrawal gives you no marker. It traps you inside a long, dragging question. What are we, really? And while you are trapped inside that question, they get what they want. Your attention is still pointed at them, your mind is still orbiting them, and you are still auditing yourself instead of auditing their behavior. The first thing you need to understand is this: a narcissist rarely leaves before they have anchored you. That anchor can be financial dependence, emotional dependence, fear of losing them, or simply the habit of reading the room to stay safe. They dismantle you with a very precise rhythm: distant today, sweet tomorrow, ice cold the next day. You stop knowing which version is real, and that uncertainty creates addiction. Your brain starts chasing the rare reward of a day when they are kind. From the outside, people say, "Why don't you just leave?" But the person inside understands. You are not stuck because love is beautiful. You are stuck because a reward-punishment pattern conditions your nervous system. And once your nervous system is conditioned, you start explaining for them, lowering your needs, increasing your tolerance, as if you do it right, the good version will return. Second, before they leave, they often restructure life so that you are least able to stand back up. You may notice it in things that look small. You control less money, make fewer decisions, have less freedom. You report more, ask permission more, and peace becomes a reward for obedience. This is how control works. It does not always require direct threats. It only needs to turn your freedom into something you must earn. And once you start believing, "I'm safe because of them," you are bound at the deepest level, self-worth. In reality, coercive power in intimate relationships is more common than people want to admit. The World Health Organization states that 1 in 3 women globally experiences physical and/or sexual violence in her lifetime, mostly by an intimate partner, and data from the United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention shows how frequent boundary-violating behaviors can be. About 15.2% of women have experienced stalking in their lifetime, and about 9.2% have been stalked by an intimate partner. These numbers help you place your experience in the right frame. This is not you being too sensitive. This is a real power pattern that exists far beyond your story. Third, and this is what disorients you most, they leave with a pre-edited narrative. In that narrative, they are the one who tried, and you are the one who was too much. They scatter sentences designed to puncture your dignity. You're never satisfied. I'm exhausted because of you. You make everything heavy. The goal is not truth. The goal is for you to carry a guilt that stops you from being angry in the right direction. If you carry guilt, you will seek peace. If you seek peace, they can return at any time to test whether the control cord still exists. And this is why survivors often say something painfully accurate. Being discarded by a narcissist doesn't hurt most because they left. It hurts most because you don't know whether you're allowed to close the door. So in this section, what you need is not to guess whether they still love you, but to recognize what they prepared so that you would collapse. When you name the strategy, you stop negotiating with illusion and start negotiating with reality. You were pulled into a game whose rules were designed to make you doubt yourself. And the moment you see that clearly, you take the first step of freedom, because once the light turns on, the trap is no longer invisible. And once you begin to recognize their silent exit, you'll face a colder truth. A narcissist doesn't disappear to end things, they disappear to rebuild power in the cheapest way possible. A clean breakup gives you the right to place a period. A foggy disappearance suspends you inside an ellipsis. And when you're suspended inside that ellipsis, your nervous system is forced to do what it hates most. Live inside uncertainty. You don't suffer in the simple way of, it's over, so I grieve. You suffer in the brutal way of, it's over, but I'm not allowed to understand. That gap becomes the trap. It keeps you checking, guessing, self-blaming, and slowly, depending on a tiny signal from them, the way you would depend on oxygen. Here's the mechanism many survivors describe without having language for it. An obsession loop fueled by intermittent reward. When a healthy person leaves, you hurt, but your brain has enough data to accept reality. A narcissist leaves in a way that feels like they're gone, but still somehow here, and then drops a fragment of hope, a midnight message, a meaningless emoji, a coincidental story view, a question that sounds kind. Are you okay? Because it's small and vague, your brain cannot close the file. It gets activated to solve the puzzle, and the more it tries to solve, the more it gets stuck. You start remembering their sweetness, deleting their cruelty, and whispering, maybe I misunderstood, maybe they're confused, maybe I was too harsh. Not because you're naive, but because they're giving you exactly what you lack, something to hold on to. In confusion, humans cling to anything that resembles meaning, even if it's bait. This is the most ruthless part. The ambiguity is not a side effect, it is a strategy. A narcissist knows that if they become a clearly bad person, you gain protective anger. But if they preserve a maybe there's still something image, you will do the remaining work for them. You will keep the door psychologically open. So they build a bond that doesn't require physical closeness. Remote control through signals. They don't need to be present. They only need you to stay ready to react. And when you react, whether with rage, pleading, or a single, "Why are you doing this?" you've confirmed they still have access to your nervous system. For them, that's proof the cord still connects. They don't need your love. They need you to remain inside their gravitational field. You can see it in the way they drop bait. The bait is always customized to trigger your deepest vulnerability. If you self-blame, they use half apology, half accusation. "I'm sorry it turned out like this, but you know you pushed me away too." If you're compassionate, they play the victim. "I'm falling apart. No one understands me." If you fear replacement, they leak images of someone new, just vague enough to force your imagination to do the worst work. If you fear abandonment, they vanish the moment you start stabilizing, and return the moment you stand up, training your brain to learn a false rule. "I'm not allowed to be at peace." And once your brain learns that rule, they don't even need to show up anymore. The idea of them is enough to steal your sleep, focus, and emotional stability. That's when control moves from outside to inside. They're not here, but your system still runs after them like background software. So the key point in this part isn't, will they come back? The real question is, what state are they trying to keep you in through ambiguity? If every reappearance throws you into analysis, if you feel like you need an explanation to live, if you fear closing the door because it feels cruel, then you're being managed by something very refined. Guilt plus hope plus missing data. And the way out isn't arguing for closure, because arguing is fuel. The way out is to do the opposite of instinct. Stop reading them, start reading yourself. Each time they drop bait, don't ask what do they want. Ask, what part of me is this activating abandonment fear, the need to be chosen, or the reflex to self-blame? The moment you name what's being activated, you pull power back to its rightful place, your awareness. And that's how the cord begins to break, not through one dramatic cut, but through the quiet act of refusing to keep supplying it with electricity. And when you begin to stop reacting the way you used to, when your silence shifts from confusion to conscious distance, the narcissist enters a far more dangerous phase, controlling the narrative instead of controlling you. This is the moment they realize they can no longer pull you back with vague signals. And when they can't manipulate your nervous system directly, they manipulate how others perceive you. That's when the smear campaign begins, not loud, not obvious, but calculated and precise. What you must understand is this. A smear campaign is not driven by personal hatred, it's driven by fear of exposure. For a narcissist, your calm absence threatens something deeper than loss. It threatens the I am innocent identity they survive on. If you walk away and remain steady, a dangerous question starts forming in other people's minds. What if the problem wasn't you? To prevent that question from taking shape, they move first by rewriting the roles. They rarely say outright, she's terrible. Instead, they hide behind moral language. I don't want to speak badly, but she's changed so much. I tried everything, but I couldn't save the relationship. I just hope she's okay, she hasn't been herself lately. These aren't confessions, they are cognitive bait, designed to plant doubt without evidence, to make listeners draw conclusions on their behalf. And once people start seeing you with uncertainty, the narcissist has already won. They don't need you back, they just need you to lose moral ground. At this stage, a familiar psychological trap appears for the survivor. Silent self-defense. You want to explain. You want to correct the story. You want to say, that's not what happened. But every time you speak, you step onto a stage they've already set, because to a narcissist, truth doesn't matter, composure does. They've rehearsed the victim role for years. You, carrying shock and grief, naturally appear too emotional, and the narrative flips. They become the wounded one, and you become unstable. This is the most brutal reversal. Not only is the relationship distorted, but your identity comes under question. You start asking yourself, am I too sensitive? Did I overreact? Was I not compassionate enough? This mechanism is deadly because it plugs directly into the self-blame loop already planted earlier. The smear campaign doesn't need to convince the world. It only needs to convince you to doubt yourself. And once you do, you weaken exactly as they intend. What makes it worse is that the campaign often travels through people you trust. Mutual friends, colleagues, even family. The narcissist doesn't lie outright. They curate information. They tell part of the truth and erase the psychological abuse. They keep your reactions and remove their provocations. One moment you cried. One moment you got angry. One moment you set a boundary. Stripped of context, those moments become proof that you were the problem. And hearing your own story retold this way doesn't just hurt, it feels like erasure. So, if you're here, understand this. You don't need to clear your name with words. You need to re-anchor reality. A smear campaign only works when you still need validation from those who were never truly aligned with you. When you stop seeking approval from the crowd, their story loses momentum. Truth has one advantage: lies never do. It doesn't need constant repetition. Over time, perceptive people notice a pattern everywhere the narcissist goes. There's always an ex-victim, misunderstandings, and the same recycled story. You don't need to expose them. Reality will. And here's the core truth. Your silence is not defeat. In this game, silence is not avoidance, it's energy withdrawal. When you stop fueling a false narrative, it collapses on its own. Because no script survives without actors. And the moment you refuse the role of the guilty one, the stage begins to empty. After the smear campaign has been planted, after your image is blurred and your credibility questioned, the narcissist rarely stops there. In fact, it's often at the moment you grow exhausted from silent self-defense that they return, wearing a completely different face. This is the hoovering phase, emotional recapture, and it's more dangerous than anything before it, because this time, they don't attack. They offer hope. Hoovering is not impulsive, it's strategic. When smearing no longer provokes enough reaction, when you stop explaining and stop chasing clarity, they need another way to pull you back into orbit. And the most effective way is to target the deepest part of you, the memory of who you once believed they could become. They suddenly appear changed, softer, more reflective, sometimes with vague apologies. I've been thinking a lot. Maybe I wasn't perfect. I miss the good times. There is no clear accountability, no acknowledgement of specific harm, but it's enough to trigger a familiar reflex in you. What if this time it's real? Here's what you must understand. Hoovering is not about rebuilding a relationship. It's about checking whether the door is still open. To a narcissist, you're not someone they lost. You're an energy source they need to confirm is still accessible. Any response, cold, angry, cautious already, feeds the system. It proves they still exist in your emotional field. Hoovering often shows up in ordinary, deceptive forms. A casual check-in, a shared memory, an unexpected act of kindness, even defending you against the very smears they once spread. This contradiction is not growth. It's nervous system manipulation, designed to keep you oscillating between vigilance and hope. Many people fall here not because they're weak, but because they once loved genuinely. Your brain stored those rare moments of tenderness as proof that the real version of them still exists. Hoovering exploits that memory. It awakens the version of you who tried to save them, who believed patience would change everything. But here's the critical truth. Hoovering never comes with structural change. Real change shows consistency, accountability, and respect for boundaries, even if that means losing you. Hoovering only appears when you pull away, and it vanishes the moment you step back into your old role. A key sign you're being hoovered is familiarity. You start explaining again, lowering standards, telling yourself you'll be more careful this time. Pause here. In a healthy relationship, you don't need to be careful to be loved. The constant self-adjustment is proof that power was never shared. Hoovering often wears a moral disguise. Talk of healing, growth, lessons learned, but watch behavior, not language. Do they respect your silence or only tolerate you when you respond? Do they take responsibility for concrete harm or speak in vague generalities to avoid truth? That line separates genuine change from polished manipulation. If you're here, don't rush to decide whether to return. What you need first is to interrupt the reflex. Don't respond immediately. Don't explain. Don't debate. Observe instead. When you don't engage, do they respect your space or escalate into guilt, pressure, or anger? That answer tells you everything. Hoovering only works as long as you believe this time will be different if you do better. The truth is, you cannot love someone into health, and the moment you truly grasp that, hoovering loses its power not because you're cold, but because you're awake. After hoovering, many people enter a confusing state. You know they haven't changed. You know you were manipulated. You know going back is dangerous. Yet you still feel an invisible pull drawing you toward them. This is not weakness. This is trauma bonding, a psychological attachment formed through cycles of fear, relief, and hope. Trauma bonds do not form in healthy love. They form through intermittent reinforcement. When someone alternates between coldness and affection, abandonment and return, your nervous system loses the ability to distinguish safety from danger. Your brain begins to associate love with high stress, and that's when attachment turns into addiction. In narcissistic relationships, rare moments of kindness don't bring peace, they bring relief, like water after deprivation. That relief triggers intense dopamine and oxytocin release. Over time, your brain learns a distorted rule: pain first, love later. And you begin to believe love must be earned through endurance. What makes trauma bonds especially dangerous is that they corrupt self-worth. You don't just miss them, you miss who you felt like when they paid attention to you. You felt special, chosen, needed. The narcissist didn't love you, but they made you feel significant by controlling access to affection. Your brain stores that feeling as proof of value. When you leave, the bond doesn't disappear. It often intensifies, because now your brain isn't just losing a person, it's losing a reward system. Their silence triggers stress. Your body reacts like withdrawal. Restlessness, insomnia, obsession, the urge for one last conversation. And if they return during that moment, hoovering becomes more than manipulation, it becomes a temporary antidote. This is why many people return, not because they believe, but because they want the pain to stop. Trauma bonding confuses love with relief. You don't go back because they're better, you go back because your nervous system hasn't healed. And each return tightens the bond. Another hallmark of trauma bonding is self-blame. Because you stayed, because you returned, you start believing you share responsibility. Narcissists exploit this. See, you can't leave me either. But the truth is, trauma bonding isn't a conscious choice. It's the result of prolonged psychological conditioning. Breaking a trauma bond cannot be done with logic alone. Understanding isn't enough. You must calm the nervous system. This requires real distance, no messages, no monitoring, no indirect updates. Every contact, however small, reactivates the loop. You also need to know, the emptiness after leaving doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. It means you're withdrawing from an addictive system. And like all withdrawal, the early phase is the hardest. But if you endure it, your brain relearns safety without pain. A sign of healing is when you stop wondering what they're doing and start wondering what you need. When you no longer play the rescuer, the empath, the one who endures. When you realize real love doesn't require suffering to exist. Trauma bonds survive on the belief that this connection is irreplaceable. But as you rebuild identity, boundaries, and internal stability, the tether weakens not through willpower but through new experiences, consistency, safety, and respect. And the moment you stop feeling pulled back isn't because you've hardened, it's because your nervous system has learned a new truth. Peace does not require pain. That's when the trauma bond dissolves, quietly, permanently. As your trauma bond begins to weaken, a paradox emerges. Their psychological tether tightens. This is the obsession phase, not driven by love, but by loss of control. For a narcissist, your departure isn't merely the end of a relationship, it's the destabilization of a structure that once kept them intact. Narcissists don't attach the way healthy people do. They don't bond through mutual intimacy, they bond through roles. You were the regulator, the mirror, the container for chaos. When you exit that role, their system loses a pillar. And when a pillar is removed, what remains isn't longing, it's ego panic. Obsession begins quietly, not with pleas, but with surveillance. They watch from afar, social media, mutual contacts, staged coincidences. The goal isn't immediate reconciliation, it's repositioning you within their internal power map. They need to know, do you still react? Are you still triggered? Do you still orbit them? This explains why they often reappear when you're doing better. It's not coincidence. Your calm signals danger. You're exiting their field. Obsession is their last attempt to pull you back into alignment, even through a single reaction. A defining feature here is the psychological tether, an invisible cord. Direct contact isn't required. If you think about them, anticipate them, or alter behavior to avoid them, the tether is active. When you avoid places out of fear of seeing them, or hesitate to post because they might see, control persists. Power lives in mental occupancy, not just interaction. At this stage, narcissists often enter a fantasy loop. They believe you haven't truly left. This stems from impaired internal closure. They cannot end relationships unless they decide to. So, they keep you unfinished, unsaid words, unresolved narratives. This ambiguity allows them to imagine returning at will. Obsession doesn't always look soft. It can morph into contempt, rage, or denial. They smear, diminish, or claim indifference, all forms of indirect emotional control. Talking about you is still holding you. Genuine indifference requires no mention. A common mistake is believing silence alone will make them forget. That works with healthy people. With narcissists, your silence initially triggers obsession because it disrupts feedback. Over time, however, if you eliminate both contact and mental occupancy, obsession starves, not instantly, but inevitably. A sign the tether is dissolving is when you stop tracking their moves, stop bracing for their return, and stop living in reaction. You begin living in choice. You go where you want, speak when aligned, and stay silent as a boundary, not fear. For the narcissist, this is the fracture point, when you no longer react, adjust, or exist in their imagined control. They lose proof of existence. And from obsession, they descend into the next phase, narcissistic collapse, quiet, internal, and irreversible. A narcissist does not collapse when you leave. They collapse when they can no longer control who you become after leaving. As long as you react with anger, pain, or defense, their ego still has fuel. But when you grow quiet, stable, and unreachable, their defensive structure begins to crack. The narcissistic ego is not internally built. It survives through external reflection. For years, they borrowed others' responses to feel real, powerful, and valuable. When one of their primary mirrors disappear, they don't just lose a person. They lose the scaffolding holding their ego together. At this stage, familiar strategies stop working. Hoovering fails. Smearing yields no reaction. Surveillance brings no control. And when all tools collapse, the narcissist is forced to face what they've always avoided: inner emptiness. This collapse is rarely dramatic. It's internal. They may still smile, post online, and appear fine, but underneath is disorientation, emptiness, irritability, and unnamed anxiety. Psychology refers to this as severe narcissistic injury, when the self-image can no longer be sustained by external validation. A core feature of narcissistic collapse is the disintegration of their self-narrative. They were always right, always wronged, always superior. Without you as witness, the story loses coherence. They no longer know who they are without reaction. This produces existential panic. If no one sees me, do I exist? Some narcissists desperately seek new supply, but new relationships rarely stabilize them. No one can replicate the exact role you played. Each new supply becomes a temporary patch on a rotting structure, and each failure accelerates collapse. Others fall into depression, chronic rage, or a sense of betrayal by the world. But this is not healthy awakening. Narcissistic collapse is not growth. It is the breakdown of illusion when there is no capacity to rebuild authentically. For you, this phase is often misread as they finally realized. In truth, most narcissists do not awaken morally or emotionally. They experience loss of power. And if they return now, it's not remorse, it's a final attempt to salvage a collapsing ego. The greatest danger here is misplaced compassion. Seeing them fragile may trigger your urge to rescue, but returning doesn't heal them, it reinstates the system that harmed you. Their collapse is not your responsibility, and your absence is not cruelty, it's a necessary boundary. A sign you are free is when their collapse no longer moves you. No satisfaction, no guilt, just clarity. You see it as the natural outcome of a control-based identity, and you are no longer part of it. Narcissistic collapse reveals a final truth. When you withdraw energy from a manipulative system, it cannot survive. Not because you destroyed it, but because it never had a solid core. And from that collapse, your paths permanently diverge. When you look back at this entire journey, one truth must be stated clearly. What keeps a narcissist from letting you go is not love, it is the loss of control. They do not collapse because they lose you. They collapse because you stop reacting. From the silent withdrawal, to hoovering, to smear campaigns, to obsession, and finally ego collapse, every stage is a desperate attempt to pull you back into your old role. The mirror, the emotional regulator, the one carrying the weight they were never capable of carrying themselves. Once you understand this, many of the questions that once tormented you begin to fall away on their own. Why did they come back just as I was starting to heal? Why wouldn't they leave me alone? Why did it never have a clean ending? The answer was never you. It was always the structure of their psychology. And here is the most important point. Your freedom does not come from them changing, apologizing, or finally realizing anything. Your freedom begins the moment you stop participating in the system of control they built. This is not an emotional decision, it is a strategic one. In practice, there are 3 core principles that prevent you from ever being pulled back again. First, understand that every reaction is fuel. There is no meaningful difference between positive or negative reactions, anger, explanations, justification, pity, even defiant silence. All of it keeps you inside their field of attention. Second, end all attempts to explain your story to them or to people they influence. You do not need a manipulator to understand you correctly. You only need to get out. And third, rebuild boundaries as a living structure, not a promise to yourself. A boundary is not, I won't reply if they text. A boundary is no longer placing yourself in a position where a response is required at all. A true sign of freedom is not that you never think about them, it is that their existence no longer influences your decisions, emotions, or rhythm of life. You do not need them to disappear from the world. You only need them to disappear from your nervous system. When that happens, hoovering loses its power. Smear campaigns lose their weight. Their collapse is no longer something you have to manage. You do not need to defeat them. You only need to stop playing the game. And finally, if there is one thing you must carry with you after this video, it is this. You did not leave because you were weak, and you did not stay because you didn't love enough. You left because your body and mind recognized a long-term threat. And that awareness, even if it came late, is a profound form of self-protection. A narcissist may continue repeating the same cycle with others, but you will not. Because from this moment on, your silence is no longer avoidance. It is freedom. And freedom, once established correctly, is something no one can ever take from you again.